Hi, my name is Marya. I work for Schlumberger Technology Corporation based in Sugarland near Houston. Uh, I am a material subject matter expert. At the same time, I also manage the materials technology group here based in Houston. Today, the title of this presentation is The Corrosion of Surface Treatments and Hard Coatings on alloy 74 pH in highly sour environments. So I do have two co-authors, Dean Lauppe and Virendra Singh, who is also the author of the second paper in this conference. All right, so the outline of this presentation is here. It's pretty straightforward. So first, I'm going to provide some general background, then go over some simple objectives, then go over the experimental procedure, continue with results and discussions, and finally finish with some summary and conclusions. As general background, I'm going to define for you first what sour means. So sour is a big deal. It's in reference to hydrogen sulfide or H2S. So we consider essentially a reservoir or well to be sour when there is more than 0.05 psi of H2S. That's actually defined by an industry standard, namely NACE MR 0175. So what does it mean? It means that if you have, let's say, 10,000 psi, it only takes 5 ppm of H2S to make the environment sour. And that means this environment is poisonous, it's dangerous, it's corrosive to metals, and it forces us to take a number of precautions in terms of material selection. So typically, the first precaution is, hey, we need to be careful about cracking, namely sulfide stress cracking. So essentially what happens is when you have a sour environment and you have an equipment experiencing tensile stresses, well, if the material selection is not done appropriately, or the design is not done appropriately, for example, with low stresses, you could have cracking well below the material's yield strength. This is actually the biggest concern we typically have. The second concern has to do more with uniform corrosions, actually with also all other forms of corrosions, uniform and localized. So this is a big deal. As you can see, around the world, many reservoirs do contain H2S. I mean, these are mostly in the Middle East. Kazakhstan, this is where you will find essentially double-digit percentages of H2S, but you will find H2S pretty much everywhere else. So this is a big deal, and this is why actually today we're going to be looking at it from the point of view largely of coatings and surface treatment. Before I go into those details, let me show you through a couple of pictures what hydrogen sulfide does to the equipment and what kind of damage typically we see on our equipment. So if we look a bit more towards the left, you have here 3 pictures, stainless steel 17.4 pH and a nickel chrome body or Inconel 718. So what do we see after only 20 days of exposure in the job is quite a bit of corrosion. I mean, you can see some pitting and perhaps crevice corrosion here on the Inconel 718, and you can see some heavy corrosion elsewhere on the stainless steel. For a different job, you can see here essentially heavy pitting on the internal diameter of some pressure housing. On the lower picture, you see a different type of damage, which is not really H2S specific, but nonetheless is very common in equipment. So what we see here is a scratch. So there was a sealing surface, there is a scratch. That means that this surface is not going to have the same sealing ability, and it's a damage. And because this type of damage is actually quite common, this is one reason why we are forced to look at tribological solutions, namely hard coating, hard surface treatments. And this is what we'll be discussing mostly in this presentation. And if you look a little bit toward the right here, we see more pitting, including within an O-ring groove. We see some flaking or some spooling of a hard coating here, an electrolysis nickel plating. So we can see that the surface treatment and the plating that today in use have deficiencies. And this is what we want to look at specifically in this short investigation. So the objectives are pretty clear. Number one, evaluate general corrosion resistance of surface treatments and coatings in a highly sour environment. Determine what surface treatments and coatings are more resistant. Thus potentially offer some advantages. And we have to compare them against a baseline. So we have decided this baseline is going to be 17 for pH. And overall, through this investigation, we acquire a better understanding of the mechanisms of surface treatment and coating failures, which is the last objective of this short investigation. So with this, here is the experimental procedure. So first of all, we had to acquire a test article made of 17 for pH. We acquired, I believe, 5 or 6 dozens of those. The samples are shown here on the right. So these are essentially rectangular coupons. And once acquired, they were essentially dispatched to a number of professional surface treatment and coating applicators, mostly based in the US, but also in Europe. So among these surface treatments, essentially we had nitriding, 2 types of processes, the QBQ process, which is liquid bath, and some higher nitriding process from 2 different vendors. Then we had a number of plating processes, electrolysis nickel with PTFE, which gives self-lubrication, as well as an aerospace nanostructured nickel cobalt phosphorus coating. We also had a CVD tungsten carbide coating and a DRC coating for comparison purposes. So upon acquiring a great number of coupons with these surface treatments and coatings, we expose them to 2 different environments, which I'm going to show in the next slide. And upon completing the testing, we run a number of examinations, visual, weight loss, SEM, EDS, and so on. All right, so here's a description of the environment. So 2 tests were conducted. The second one complements the first one. All tests were conducted by an external laboratory. They used essentially sour rated autoclaves, 5,000 psi. So we can see our coupons were subject to these 2 test runs. The environments for test number 2 is more aggressive than test number 1, simply because we increased the chlorides and we also made the environment longer. The test longer, to 720 hours or 1 month. So what is important to see is actually we have a total pressure of 4,000 psi. This 4,000 psi is actually made of 1,500 psi of H2S and 500 psi of CO2. So these 2 gases, CO2 and H2S, they do dissolve in a brine, which is described here on the left. The brine is supersaturated, becomes very, very corrosive. And to this brine, we added all these components which you see here on the left. All right, so first let's start with some description of some of the first results. So here I'm showing you the reported corrosion rate that we measured across a variety of test coupons for test number 1 and test number 2. So perhaps let's start first with the reference alloys, so 17 for pH and 718. So what we see is that Inconel 718 here do corrode less than 17 for pH. So in fact, it appears to be about 1/10 17 for pH. The same observation that we made also for test number 1 in blue here, where this number of 0.08 has to be compared to 0.01. So essentially, 17 for pH and 718 are the take on is that the 74 pH corrodes approximately 10 times more than 718 in the conditions selected for this study. So with this in mind, now let's look at the nitriding first. So obviously, by seeing much longer bars here, well, we do have much more corrosion when there is nitriding. Okay. So if we look at 17.4 pH, for which we have most of the results, we can see the corrosion is increased significantly, whether with QPQ or with higher nitride. We do happen to see a little bit less corrosion when we use the third, this other supplier, which uses a low temperature nitriding process. But keep in mind also the amount of nitriding is very, very limited. And this is essentially why we are seeing less corrosion here than you would see with the other processes. So essentially, nitriding does not improve corrosion. On the contrary. The same can be said of the plating processes we've selected for this investigation. We can see that the corrosion rates are pretty significant and essentially always higher than what you see here for the reference alloy. So definitely there is no improvement in applying any of these electrolysis nickel processes, or even this very advanced process here, which happens to corrode as well. Obviously corrodes a bit less at the first test than in the second test, as seen earlier. It does corrode quite a bit. So where there is a bit more light out of the tunnel is actually with this particular coating, HD. HD essentially is a nanostructured tungsten carbide. And this is the only coating out of this investigation that turns out to outperform the bare material. Okay. And finally, when we move towards the DLC coating, I mean, this is a very specific DLC from one vendor. It was selected to be thick, about 20 micrometers in thickness. And we can see that this particular DLC did not perform at all. The reported weight loss is very comparable to the plating. And we'll understand shortly why it is comparable to the plating. Okay. So with this, maybe let's have a look at the visual appearance of any of those coatings. So here we have pictures before the test, after the test, and this test is only test number 1. This is really to give an idea of what we've seen and how this can be put into perspective compared to the results I just showed in the previous slide. So what we see is a discoloration in most cases. In fact, this discoloration tends to be on the golden side. Essentially, the exposure to H2S tends to discolor many of the coupons and make them a little bit more golden appearance, which is actually extremely true for QPQ, a lot more than some other coatings. In some cases, it's very blackish, very, very black, which is an indication of more corrosion. If you look at the 17.4 DLC coating, if you remember from the previous slide, there was quite a bit of weight loss. And the reason is simply because this coating, as you can see, it fell off for majority of the exposed surface. So maybe with this, let's look at a few of these coating and surface treatments at higher magnifications. Here I have the reference material. I have the nitrided 17.4 by the QPQ process. I have another nitrided surface, and I have the tungsten carbide produced by CVD process. So obviously we have a variety of damages as we look from left to right. It seems the least damage is on the right here. We still have a bit of discoloration as we see elsewhere. Okay, this discoloration is to a lesser extent And when we look in the SEM, we don't see much happening. This is in stark contrast with, let's say, the 74 QPQ. So here we see a very golden coating. We see islands that are different. And when you look in the SEM, essentially what you see is you see that wherever you have those little islands, actually a piece of the surface treatment is gone. Okay. So we do have some spalling happening here. When we look at this low temperature nitriding, we also have this golden appearance. We don't see this layer flaking off, or at least not to the same extent, and perhaps not within 2 weeks. Please remember, this picture do apply to test number 1 only, and test number 1 was only 2 weeks. If you were to look at 1 month, 2 months, and of course continue this test, there is no doubt corrosion will proceed, and eventually we would probably find something very similar to what we saw on the left, where essentially the surface treatment, upon being corroded, falls off. Okay. On the left side, we essentially see just a bit of pitting and deposition. All right, so now I'm going to have a set of SEM and EDS analysis presented to you. First, starting with the 174 QPQ. So what do we see? We see the same picture as seen in the previous slide. And now it's very, very, very clear that actually a chunk of the surface treatment is missing. So why is it missing? Well, if we look at the chemical compositions here and there, what we see is that the coating has actually reacted tremendously with the H2S. In fact, the top layer here, you see, is comprised approximately of 32% of sulfur, while what you see underneath essentially is closer to being the bare metal underneath. Okay, so what we're seeing is quite a bit of sulfur, and surprisingly, along with this sulfur, we do not see that much of, let's say, iron or nickel. What we see is copper. So remember, 17.4 pH contains 4% copper. So it turns out that actually copper appears to be the most reactive here. And there is strong evidence actually that this copper and this sulfur do combine and do form a copper sulfide. And this copper sulfide may not be favorable in terms of obtaining a high corrosion resistance. Why do I say it's copper sulfide? Simply because this is one of the sulfide which is more thermodynamically stable among the various elements we see here. All right, let's move on to a second coating. Here I'm showing you electrolysis nickel. So we do see some spalling, delamination. We definitely have at least 2 layers. The composition of these layers are shown here. Even though there is some reaction with sulfur, we are not truly able to detect it very carefully. However, we see flaking off. Okay. If we are looking at the next coating here, the electrolytic nickel cobalt phosphorus coating, so we don't see the coating peeling off, falling off. We see a more uniform corrosion. And we see a little bit of sulfur intake. I mean, for the electrolysis nickel, we saw almost no sulfur intake. For the QPQ, we saw 30%. Here we see 1%. And it appears to be very uniformly distributed. Okay, but what is important to see, there is no spalling. When you look at the next coating, which is the tungsten carbide, we do see a little bit of interaction of the H2S, where 2.6% or 2 to 3% of sulfur has reacted to the surface. We see no spalling, which is a good indication that whatever sulfide was produced, at least it sticks to the surface and does not promote further corrosion. When we look at the EDS mapping here, again, we can see there are some specific chemical affinities, perhaps a little bit more, again, between the copper and the sulfur than you would see elsewhere. Now let's look at the DLC coating. Remember, based on the general overview seen a few slides ago, this is where we had some of the worst corrosion rates. So what do we see? Here's a coupon. We see that this coupon does not look black, which is the normal color of DLC. It has become, once again, stainless steel looking. So we can find a bit of TLC perhaps here, but essentially it's gone everywhere. Okay? When we look the optical microscope, we can see a bit of DLC and we can see the bare materials around it. Same in the SEM. And when you go into the EDS at high magnification, we can recognize through the carbon mapping where the DLC is, and everywhere else, essentially, this is the bare material. Okay? So the DLC has spoiled quite a bit. There is a bit of evidence of localized corrosion through perhaps spitting. But other than that, it's important to see that there is no chemical affinity between the DLC and the rest. However, this coating is performing worse. So a strong affinity towards sulfur or H2S for a coating is not synonymous of very poor corrosion resistance. So with this, let me reach a little bit of summary in conclusions. So first of all, the nitriding process does not improve corrosion resistance, and this is not why it is being used. It is essentially used for abrasion resistance purposes. When you compare the QP process versus the other processes at low temperature, you find out that the QPQ process actually offers less resistance towards corrosion than the low temperature nitriding process, for which also the level of nitriding is less. Okay? When we look specifically at the coatings, electrolysis nickel and electrolytic plating, we have evidence that these are not very well protected. The electrolysis nickel is definitely not protective, as found in this study, even though it did not react much with the H2S. Okay? If you look at the tungsten carbide CVD coating, is referred to as HD, it is found to be the most corrosion resistant. Okay? The DLC coating, that's the opposite. It grossly underperformed and was the least resistant. So the takeaway out of all these observations is simply that coating failure is not found to be related to chemical affinity. Instead, coating failure appears to be to proceed by localized corrosion. And once localized corrosion starts and eventually reaches underlayers, I mean, there are reasons to believe that corrosion happens very quickly between a top layer and a substrate or a sublayer, and you end up with delamination or spalling. So I think with this, I'd like to thank everyone for for attending or listening to this presentation. And I guess this is open to presentation. Thank you very much. And bye-bye.